Hey guys, today I'm going to talk you through my Sauron build and how to recreate it if you'd like to do so yourself. First of all, disclaimer, this build's not about being an OP build, it's about building a character in line with a theme, restricting the weapon and magic options to that theme. So what did Sauron actually look like? We know he's a shapeshifter, taking form as a werewolf, a vampire, and then as an elf called Anatar when he deceives Celebrimbor into creating the rings of power before creating his one ring to rule them all. He also appears in Numenor as a man or one in man's shape, but greater than any even of the race of Numenor in stature. And it seemed to men that Sauron was great, though they feared the light of his eyes. To many he appeared fair, to others terrible, but to some evil. His body was destroyed in the downfall of Numenor, and he was prevented from ever taking on a fair guise again. Tolkien wrote about Sauron's body in the Third Age. In a letter he wrote that Sauron should be thought of as very terrible. The form that he took, once he became fully incarnate after the drowning of Numenor, was that of a man of more than human stature, but not gigantic. Tolkien actually painted Sauron, but this was a depiction of him at the moment when the destruction of the ring is destroying his physical form. I chose to combine as much of the depictions and descriptions of him as possible, drawing from his elf, man, and eventual Dark Lord form. I also chose to add a golden ring tattoo on his forehead, just to kind of depict the One Ring. I just thought it looked pretty cool, and just adds that reference. For the eyes, I decided to go down the route of following the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending questline, where you go beneath Leyndell and defeat Moog the Omen. Although you could just give him yellow eyes and add red clouding, which does work, but it doesn't look quite as piercing or as cool or as evil. So what weapons did Sauron use? Sauron was a sorcerer and a shapeshifter, but the only weapon Sauron is described as using in the books are his hands when he burns Gil-galad, the High King of the Elves, to death. For this reason, I decided to make him a pyromancy faith build, using a mixture of Giant's Flame, Black Flame, and Mesmer Flame incantations, along with a few buffs to weapons and damage, etc. I'll go into these in a bit more detail. I chose to go with the Great Mace with a heavy infusion with the Eruption Ash of War that you can get from Bernal during the Volcano Manor questline, and I thought this was fitting going along with the vibes of Mount Doom. I've also gone with Milady. I've made this a quality option because my build is a quality build. You just get higher damage with a quality infusion, I find. Along with that, we are using the Erdtree seal. It has the highest scaling of any seal in the game if you've high faith stats, giving you 353 incant scaling. I'm also using the Fire Knight seal. This gives you a buff to Mesmer's Flame incantations of 15%. I'm also using Giant's seal, which boosts Giant Flame incantations by 20%. And then also the Godslayer's seal, which boosts Black Flame incantations by 10%. Now, if you have these equipped in your offhand while you're using your main seal in your main hand, you will receive these buffs with that seal scaling. In terms of armor, for the helm, I recommend using the Helm of Night. Obviously looks very much like Sauron's helm from the movies. Personally, after going to all the trouble of getting my flame eyes, I actually started using this with that turned off. In terms of armor, you can use the Armor of Night. Personally, I just find the damage negation really low, the poise is really low. You'll see I've got a really low poise of 22, and even with the helm, I'm only going up to 26, which means even dogs are going to stagger you. What I've used is the Knight's Cavalry set. You get 25 poise off the main armor. It's got good damage negation. It also does look like the armor that we see in the movies. You can use the Knight's Cavalry Greaves. That still brings you up to 45 poise. Personally, I like to use the Greaves of Solitude, again from the DLC, although they are slightly off in colour. But using the Helm of Night, you can get up to 49 poise. So for incantations, I'm using Flame Grant Me Strength. This gives you a 20% boost to fire damage, as well as a 20% increase to strength. I'm using Blood Flame Blade. It inflicts bleed buildup on your enemy, as well as causing fire damage at 0.4 of your seal scaling. Fire Serpent. This is really useful in PvP. You can get this off, people will roll out the way and you can run at them and catch them in their roll. If you're using Milady, really good weapon for roll catching. Mesmer's Orb does take up 2 slots. You launch into the air and then explode. You can be caught in the air whilst doing this. You need to time it very well, but it looks great. Black Flame Ritual, again great for PvP. If someone's been really aggressive, you can back off a little bit and get this off. They'll have to walk through the flames. You can also conceal yourself if you just want to launch something like Giant's Flame Take Thee. I really like Scouring Black Flame. It's really useful for taking out groups, does a lot of damage. It's quite easy to dodge in PvP, but can be useful. I'm also using Burno Flame. This is great for melting bosses, especially if they're large, because multiple pillars will hit them at once and cause damage to them. Giant's Flame Take Thee hurls a massive ball of raging fire. If you charge this, it will cause it to explode as well, so I really like using this to blow up groups of enemies. And in terms of talismans, I'm using a Dragon Crest Great Shield to enormously boost physical damage negation. I'm also using the two-handed sword talisman that you find in the DLC. This just helps boost the giant mace damage when I'm two-handing that. Also, I'm using the Godfrey icon. This does add a significant increase to your charge spells and skills. I'm not really using any charge skills, but every single incantation that I am using, apart from the buffs, is chargeable. I can charge to increase all of these in one way or another. I'm also using the Shard of Alexander to boost the attack power of skills, so that I get a little bit more out of Eruption on the Great Mace, and I get a little bit more out of my Wing Stance heavy attack, which I like to use for a bit of pierce damage. So for my Wondrous Physic, I'm using Flame Shrouding Cracked Tear to temporarily boost my fire attacks, and the Stone Barb Cracked Tear, which temporarily makes stance break easier. I've also added some Ashes details to the build as well to make it a bit more Sauron. We hear Gandalf telling Frodo to be careful because the enemy has many spies in his service, birds and beasts. I like to use Stormhawk Dean because when he does his war cry, he applies a buff to the player's physical damage, stamina damage, and poise damage by 20% for 60 seconds. Another Ashes I like to use is the Demi-Human Ashes. They just kind of look like orcs. I also like to use the Regal Omen Burn. As you can see, it uses your FP to unleash many wraiths that chase down foes. Okay guys, well thanks for watching. I'll put any details in the description. Any questions, do let me know.